Apologies, make another start by putting the microphone on. Welcome everybody, and I hope a happy and a healthy new year for you. Thank you all for sparing the time to be here today. I was going to say it's probably the first time for some time that we've all been in the same room, but Robin isn't. Not very well, fairly well backlit at the moment. So welcome to those in the room and out of the room. And thank you all for sparing the time again. Thank you also to Hugh, who has provided the biscuits. Without any encouragement, a true mark of an independent mind. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm John Bailey, Chair of the Committee and Councillor for Martock. Welcome to everybody again. I'll go around the room and invite everybody to introduce themselves, I think, starting on my left.
Good afternoon, I'm Steve Fader from Democratic Services.
Good afternoon, Alan Hemsley, Co-opted Member.
David Strepp, Co-opted Member.
Paul Hooper, Co-opted Member.
Councillor Hugh Davis wanted to watch it, and it's 8 places east of Stagursey. Okay.
Francis Nicholson, Member for Exmoor.
Nottingham Councillor for Froome West.
Scott Waldridge, Head of Governance and Democratic Services.
David Clark, Monitoring Officer and Service Director for Governance, Democratic and Legal Services.
Brian Smedley, Councillor for Bridgewater South.
Robin.
Yeah, and Robin Halton, Co-opted Member. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Robin. The agenda and papers have been published on the Council's website in advance of the meeting. Could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information? Today's meeting will run in a hybrid format with committee members and key officers physically present in JMR, not County Hall. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or observe. The Council will be making a recording of the meeting to assist with recordings of our discussions. Please only speak at the Chair's invitation. Switch on the microphone on the desk. Say your name before speaking. Turn off after speaking. I'll be the one that probably breaks that rule very soon. Turn off microphones for those that are online via Teams, and cameras when not speaking, just to hold on to the bandwidth. But first, sort of a point of sadness for me really is I want to say a few words and ask others around the room to reflect on Alan Gloak and what they knew of him. I'll just say a brief introduction, and I'll make my comments after everybody else who wants to speak. I wish it to be a reflection rather than a moment of silence. Although coming from a Quaker family, I'm used to funerals which are mostly silent, but I'm sure you've got lots of memories. But background to Alan: was elected former Mendiv District Council in '95 for the Glastonbury St Mary ward, and then to Somerset County Council from 2001 to 17 to represent local communities in Glastonbury. He also served as the chair of Somerset County Council from 2005 to 2009 and as an alderman. He was mayor of Glastonbury Town Council 2003 to 4. So Alan was awarded an MBE in 2010 for his services to local government. Just after Alan's family have asked me to let you know that a special celebration of his life, and I think probably all you know this, but will be held on Friday the 16th of February at 11 AM in St John's Church, Glastonbury High Street. So I'll just hold a moment's silence, and if anybody would like to speak about or reflect on Alan's life, that is up to you. Otherwise, we'll have a minute's silence. Robin, would you like to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was I sort of covered most of it in what I emailed round to the members of the committee. I mean, obviously Alan was was chair of this committee and a member of the committee as well for many years, and was kind of you know, we worked together closely when there was the transition to the well, in fact, through at least two transitions of legislation, and we attended sort of many events together. And he was a lovely man. You know, he was so kind to me as a sort of newly co-opted member, kind of bringing me under his wing and kind of showing me kind of what was expected in the committee. And yeah, just a really kind-hearted and lovely man. We went on, he invited me to be a trustee of a charity that was involved locally in Shepton Mallet, which we did together for a number of years. We were lucky enough to be presented with the Queen's Award by the Countess of Wessex, which was a lovely thing that we did together. And I think perhaps my most hilarious moment with him was when, because he had the freedom of the town of Glastonbury, he was able to drive his sheep down the high street, something which he enjoyed doing every year. And one year they very famously bolted into the boots in Shepton Mallet, in Glastonbury High Street, and caused absolute chaos, and he ended up on the front page of the local newspaper with his sheep running around the boots. So you know, that was absolutely hilarious. But yeah, a lovely man, and a great loss to sort of local democracy. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, I just make a few reflective thoughts myself. Alan was a man who seemed to have, like a lot people in public service, but particularly him, had like a stick of rock, his community written right through the middle of him. But I reflect on the fact that when I was first elected in 2009, that he was a mentor for me, and he always had that twinkle in his eye. However serious the situation got, there'd be some comment that would come out which would actually leaven and make people realise that whilst we're talking about something very serious, it was actually life that was going on around us, and we could have a joke about it. I also realised fairly soon that he was involved in agribusiness, which I was, so there's another common area there, and we'd often get distracted about talking about agricultural situations, usually in the sort of farmyard manure side or those sort of areas, but a lovely bloke and someone who's been a servant of his community. So thank you very much for that, and we'll move on into the fourth of the agenda now. Apologies for absence.
No apologies, Chair. Everyone's here.
Thank you, Steve. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, public question time. No one has registered to speak.
Chair, again, happy to update. Apologies that it's only taken us longer than planned. Hopefully members will appreciate, certainly in terms of the focus on the council's financial emergency. This is something that we will be progressing certainly during spring of this year. And again, happy to report back to the next meeting on the progress of that.
Carry that forward to March, the March meeting, 27th of March. Thank you, Scott.
That was done, Chair, certainly provided through to the priority group.
Scott. P2, to look at the improving response levels to, at improving response levels to the survey and uptake of the code of conduct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've done nothing about it. I think quite deliberately, because as we know, we're in a mess about what our code of conduct should say anyway. Things going to and fro from the full council. I think it's inappropriate to be trying to persuade town and city, town and parish councils to adopt something that we can't even decide what it is. And I think it's much better left alone for the time being, at least. And since they do not have to adopt our own code of conduct, I'm not at all sure that we have any role other than saying we think it's a good thing. And I don't think we should be saying we think it's a good thing until we've decided what it is. I really appreciate it.
Would you like to carry that forward and perhaps have a discussion with the rest of the members of P2 for the next meeting?
Sorry, microphone. I'll certainly do that, but I'm not sure. It's going to take a lot to persuade me to move from that position.
Sorry, Francis, I wasn't sure whether it was your view or the view of all of P2. Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. Well, it's not fine, but it's, you know, it's an accurate reflection of the situation, which is what we want. So shall we move that forward and P2 perhaps come forward with some recommendations or thoughts as a group for the next meeting, which is the 27th of March? Everybody happy with that? Thank you, Francis. Item 3, Officer Code of Conduct. Service Director to share with union reps and to update the committee. That was down to Scott.
Thank you, Chair. And again, really just to report that that work's still ongoing with our Service Director of Workforce, certainly in terms of discussions with trade union representation, which is again part of the process should you try and change any of that officer code of conduct. I think the key thing to reflect, and I know I've touched on it in my previous update, clearly in the light of the council's financial emergency, there is quite a focus on our discussions with trade unions on other matters at the moment. So I'll just bear that in mind.
We carry that forward to the next meeting. Code of Conduct complaints. The complaint figures with costings to be circulated monthly to committee members. And that's been done, and there's some discussion on that on the agenda, so I'll carry that forward to that point. That's to be reviewed on the 27th of March. And the complaint numbers to add in the reconciled onto page 24. I think that was at the end of, we'll come back to that when we pick up this item on the agenda, I think. If David, you're happy with that? Gifts and hospitality is on the agenda, and so is work programme and action. So that's the action plan. Anything that I've missed that you'd like to pick up? Thank you. Right, on to the minutes then. Is everybody happy to record that? Any comments about the minutes, or are we happy to record that? David?
Sorry, can I just raise, I know we're going to talk about this under gifts and under the next item on gifts and hospitality, but there is a paragraph here that says that the last but one paragraph on page 9 says that concerns were raised by some committee members that 0.96 of the code was not adopted by some of Somerset City, Town and Parish Councils. So I think I made that point at the time. And the point that I made was that we just accepted the fact that we would accept the LGA code as it came to us. Now, the version that we got, so we didn't go and make a conscious decision not to report gifts offered. which is what 9.6 relates to. So yeah, what I don't understand is, were parish, town and city councils sent a different version of the code of conduct from that the council have? Is it another edition? Because 9.6 is not in the version of the code that we received. So we just signed off what we were given effectively. So is that a different version from the council, full council's version? Or I don't understand, you know, so my concern here is that parish councils were sent a different version to the council.
Thank you, David. Are you saying, when you say we, you're talking
I'm
about?
talking about Kingston St Mary Parish Council, sorry.
The parish council,
Sorry,
either standards
yeah.
committee or the,
So we, as I say, Kingston St Mary Parish Council just received the version that we thought was, you know, the version of the code of conduct that was going to be accepted widely across Somerset. But when we started looking at gifts and hospitality, 9.6 is not in that version of the code that we were sent. So we didn't make a conscious decision as Kingston Parish Council not to report gifts offered and not received. So I'm saying is if the point of adopting a common code across the council, parish councils, city councils, whatever, is that we have a common council, a common code. What I'm saying is that 9.6 isn't in the version that we were sent. And I wonder whether that relates to all parish councils, whether they were sent a different version.
okay, thank you, David. Could I ask officers perhaps to comment on that?
There were definitely differences, Chair, between the version for the city, town and parish councils and Somerset Council's version, just because purely the model code referred to activities such as overview and scrutiny, which is not part of a parish council's function. So there was different differences. So it was a bespoke parish version, but it was largely the same. As regards item 9.6, I'll have to revisit the code that was distributed and come back to you on that.
Is that okay for you, David? Can we come back to you on that
Yeah.
one? I think it's,
I think it's just
in
good to know that when we're looking at sort of getting commonality of a code, whether it is commonality or whether it's just different versions, which is quite understandable, that there should be different versions for the council and whatever, but it's just clear to know when we're going to talk to parish council to say, you know, what we want to do here is make, you know, have the same, so that we don't have 50,000 versions or 5,000 versions of a code, but we've got a common version, you know, common code. Actually, we need to just understand what we're saying. And actually, that might not quite be the case, but there are good reasons for it. But it's just knowing what we're talking about.
But were they made aware when they were circulated that it is different to the county version? Were they made aware that there is a difference?
can we look at that at the same time as you're referring back? And I think, if you're happy to do that, David.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. From recollection, the cover letter that went with the model code that was distributed said that this was a bespoke version suitable for parish adoption. So it maybe wasn't explicit in terms of there being or identify the differences, but it did refer to a bespoke version of the model code that was suitable for city, town and parish councils.
Yeah, can I then come back to the point that I made in my email to everybody about what the limit is? Because the LGA is not a binding authority for councils or for anybody, it's only an advisory body. That the amount of money that was one of the issues that was raised at full council, you know, that's so minuscule. And I raised last time, I thought it was stupid and it should be 50 quid or 100 quid that should be the amount that being used as the declaration level. The LGA is only an advisory group. It's not a mandatory governing group. That really the amount that is eventually chosen by Somerset for the figure, which could get over some of the issues I think that this was raised before, could be overcome by that, isn't it?
Can I take that forward to the item 6 where we're discussing that, Paul? If you're happy with that, thank you. Excuse me. And similarly with David, we'll pick those up all up at that particular item 6. Code of Conduct Complaints. David would like to present your report, and thank you for submitting that. I found it very interesting. Once David's presented, I'll invite committee members to speak and then any other members.
So thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is the second version of this quarterly update. It is cumulative update in terms of the figures that are presented. So that's one question I'd like to ask to the committee moving forward. Would you like to see the figures subdivided into Q1, 2, 3, and 4 so that they're not cumulative, and maybe we can reflect on the cumulative figures as part of a separate part of the report. The reason I raised this, I think, is reflected most clearly in the first table under section, or the last table under section 4.1, which shows the trends from April to September. So you'll see that May there was a proper peak in terms of the number of complaints submitted. So
Page 18, David?
yes, page 18 of the agenda. Yeah. So it shows that there was over 20 complaints submitted that month, whereas looking at the rest of the months in isolation, it's plateaued and seems to be dropping out around the 5-6 mark. So there's a general downward trend. So looking at it cumulatively, that May discrepancy skews the rest of the year, but that's something we can look at moving forward. But really, in terms of numbers, as I said, they're stable. The trends and themes are relatively stable as regards the areas of the code that complaints are made about. So disrespect and bringing council into disrepute and failure to declare an interest. You know, that represents almost 3/4 of the complaints that we found. In terms of the council's performance into responding to those complaints, we're in terms of the acknowledgement within the 5 working days, we're working out about around the 80% mark. In respect of responding within 20 working days, it's a less positive picture where it's down at 34%, albeit looking at this Q3 in isolation, it's up around the 50% mark. And just to highlight that the main reasons for that, what is on the surface of pretty poor performance, is that it's not all fully within the council's control, because we do often request additional information either from the complainant themselves or from the subject councillor to respond to that, and we then need to share our draft assessment with the independent person, and there are inevitable delays just on availability built into that process. So I'm not saying that officers are completely without fault in terms of that, but there are other factors that need to be considered. And just the summation of the report in terms of the trends and themes, the vast majority concluded no further action in terms of was necessary in terms of any breach of the code or no breach that had been identified, and or the complainant chose not to progress the report to any substantial means once we explained the process to them and the amount of information that they needed, and or that we couldn't complain about an entire parish council and it had to be focused on an individual councillor. They chose not to progress with the report. So tables and figures are all there in front of you in terms of the report. And within Appendix 1, you'll see the summary of all the complaints that have been brought forward. And just reflecting back to the action plan, where there was a request to look at to get some correlation between the overall figures. I think that was a result of the monthly reports only being initiated from July onwards. So the months April, May and June, we didn't have monthly reports for the last report. I've now gone back retrospectively and put those figures in to the spreadsheet that's shared with you. So hopefully now all the figures add up. So when you saw the report in October, while it talked about 50 odd report complaints in total, the spreadsheet perhaps only had 25 of them because we hadn't provided the monthly updates previously. But that should now be addressed, and it should all make sense, and all the figures should tally in terms of the number of reports that have been received and the monthly updates that are provided to the committee. So happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Martin.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, David. A lot of us were pretty miserable in May by the looks of things. Of course, I don't include myself in that, but that's an extraordinarily high figure. Am I to assume that there were multiple complaints about maybe one or two people at that particular time?
I think there was a combination of factors. That's definitely part of it. There was multiple complaints about a lower number of incidents. And I think there was also an approach by members of the public or complainants to give them that description, where they were testing a new system as well. They'd maybe tried their luck or tried to submit a complaint under previous regimes, whether that was the district or the legacy councils. And then as part of the new Somerset Council coming into being, they thought, here's something new. Here, let's look for a different answer to the one I previously got. So I think there's a combination of factors, but yeah, it does stick out like a bit of an anomaly in terms of the numbers that we've received.
On a similar subject, in your list you include things like Chard Town Council or Chard Town Councillor. Do they all refer to councillors, in fact, or are some of those against the council specifically? And also, in terms of numbers, when it's the same councillor, and they not been numbered councillor 1, councillor 2 in that, where is that inappropriate in this situation? But I'm also trying to work out whether you have any scheme for working out vexatious or vindictive complaints.
Yeah, so taking that last point first, certainly within the code and the guidance, there is some indication there for complainants about what we would consider to be tit for tat, politically motivated complaints, and where we would sort of resist taking that any further. So there is guidance built in to the system. Defining them as vexatious or vindictive requires a bit more of an assessment. So we need to have the background and the evidence, and that's all part of the assessment and the information gathering process to lead us to the conclusions. In terms of the councillor and councillor, yeah, it should just be council. So that under that column, it's the council that the member is a member of. I'll make sure that's corrected moving forward.
Thank you, Brian. Any other questions? Brian?
No.
Yeah, I just the statistics are interesting in themselves, but following on to Brian's question, as a member of the council, perhaps as leader of a group previously, that I received a number of complaints or number of requests of who to complain to from parishes, and sometimes about members of this council. And I know that multiple complaints perhaps have been made about one or two people, and I'm not sure that I know that anything has transpired as a result of it. I mean, other than an investigation, we've seen, I can't really quote, can I? But I mean, we know of some parish councils getting through a number of parish clerks, for example, because they feel repeatedly under threat or abused or bullied. Are we actually able to get to grips with it, especially when it's when in a sense it's at a distance, it's someone else's problem, it's the parish's problem? How much are we able to act and intervene in those circumstances if it's not, say for example, it's not one of our members?
So in terms of making recommendations, for a city, town or parish councillor who's found to have breached the code, then those recommendations go forward to the council themselves. And then it's up to the council to implement those recommendations, whether that's training or further advice or whatever the recommend or sanction, even whatever the recommendation could be. But in terms of this council's ability to enforce those, then no, we're limited in that. We are relying upon the council themselves to implement those changes or those recommendations.
David?
Up on that, are those recommendations purely for the council or are they made public?
It depends on the individual council standing orders about how they deal with complaints. But what would normally happen is they go to the clerk, and then the clerk presents that to the council. In terms of, we've had a report from the monitoring officer of standards committee. These are the recommendations. How do you wish to implement those?
No, I was just thinking on the basis of the final sanction is that those people are not elected again. You know, will the public ever be aware of those?
Yep. Generally, only if it makes it to hearing would the sanctions be definitely public, because the hearings would always recommend it take place in public. So that's when there's there's a decision report published, and the press can attend if they want and report on such matters. But those that are deemed resolved as a local resolution, then it's a little less transparent, let's say, in terms of public awareness.
Sorry, can I just ask another?
Yes, certainly, David, yeah.
It's concerning that about the response times. I mean, we went through the process and set those times as being, what was being put forward. But are we giving an unreasonable expectation to people? I mean, should we be adjusting those numbers? If we're saying people are expecting a substantive response in 20 working days, is that, are we demonstrating here that actually we're not able to meet those targets? And if that's going to be an ongoing situation, then should we not be creating that expectation? Because people are just going to be disappointed, on an ongoing basis. So is it reasonable? Are those numbers reasonable, basically? In practice, because it was very easy to put 20 days in a statement, but actually,
I was just going to add, I suppose, again, just from experience, and David will know this as well. I think one of the biggest variables, particularly in those response times, is frankly the parties concerned. You are very dependent upon the complainant operating in terms of providing any additional evidence, and similarly in terms of the subject member also responding in a timely manner. So generally some of those response times can be agreed, and they generally are, through mutual agreement, to allow for the receipt of further evidence and to allow for those sort of responses to come back. So I think it's good to have that sense of, this is the ideal, this is what we would like to achieve, but you're always dependent on those other parties as well.
I wonder if we make that clear enough in the guidance.
I think one of the previous discussions we've had is that where those guidelines are not being met, that the parties are communicating with. So they know.
I think that was, yes, but the thing is, I think sometimes, if there's a pressure of work, those communications don't happen. And I know from personal experience that they didn't happen in my case.
Yes, but I think that might have been the reason why we picked that up, David.
Yeah.
But what I was going to suggest, and I know I've got two other people who want to raise questions, is that we review this at the end of the year, which will be a further quarter. I'll come back to that perhaps in a moment. Scott Francis, sorry, I thought you were exercising your finger earlier on. And then I've got Hugh.
Might well be simpler and effective to have data in quarterly chunks. But I think because that shows, but so does the graph, so that you can see what's happening during the year. I think it's whatever way is simplest, but I think there is no harm in having a chart over time, which might go on for a couple of years or whatever, so that we can actually just see what's happening, because it's quite clear there was something extraordinary happening at the beginning of the financial year, which is gone. We'd like to see it didn't come back at the same time next year, and maybe we ought to check that. But it's I think I feel that we've gone away from thinking heavens above, we've got nothing like the number of staff to deal with this unprecedented number of complaints. How long is this going on? You know, that I think has gone away. But I think I would, in looking at the quarterly, what's happening in the last quarter, which is the most interesting bit, because these are the ones that are mostly not finished. We need a by exception mention of the ones that have not been finalised. It's a longer ago, because there's the oldest one, I think, was one registered in July. Absolutely, if there's an agreed timescale with people, then which is longer than the next days, that's fine. What we want to understand is it taking a long time because we aren't able to do what we need to do, or is it taking a long time because other people are taking a long time? And I'm not sure that we get this here. There's perhaps something about something which says we're waiting rather than we haven't done would be really helpful. So something about things that haven't been resolved, because there's a July one, there's an August one, the rest are in this current chunk mostly, I think. Something about not being too worried about how the data is presented. It's relatively simple data that we can follow, but whatever way is convenient. But I think knowing a bit over time, is there a time of year that's a problem? Does everybody get cross in August? You know, that sort of stuff. Why are some of them over 6 months out of date? And it might just be because they're not, but if they're not responding, is there some point where we are going to say, well, actually, we don't respond, we're closing this? Does any of this make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, sorry, Chair, through you. I think absolutely we can look at adding another column, for example, the reasons why deadline wasn't met, something of that nature. In terms of the ones that are still out of time, I can see
As
number
on page
34.
2, 23, 24, 23. Chard Town Council came in July. It's the fourth one up from the bottom on page 2 of the little pages, which is page 22. The next one I spotted is August, which is the second one of the following page.
Yeah.
And then from then on, we've got, you know, we're in our, essentially in our, really in our current look.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll pick those up for the next one, because I don't believe we've got any outstanding other than what's in this one. So there's something not being pulled through on the spreadsheet, but I'll pick that.
But it's just a helpful extra little check, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. You also raised the issue about reasons, and I think David's take that one on board as well, did you? Thank you.
Chair, my question to you is could I ask this in camera, please? Can I ask this in camera? Because of the delicacy of the person concerned.
Hopefully then members will be aware we don't discuss individuals. So I mean, more than happy to give out the meeting to do any specifics and answer that inquiry, but I certainly wouldn't recommend we talk about any specific individuals in a public committee meeting.
That's what I thought, thank you. So I would like to speak to one of you people on the legalities, because I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I missed out Robin, so over to Robin. Then
Yeah,
Martin.
thank you. Yeah, no, yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just really going to follow up on Martin's comment. I mean, I think that's kind of what struck me. If you look at the data, this kind of, I know it sort of appears to be anomalous, but it seems to centre on, you know, 2 or 3 main parishes. And as Martin said, you know, have we got a role? Can we offer anything to those towns and parishes that do from time to time? You know, and in my experience, it tends to be sort of transitory. It comes and goes, like Martin said. You know, you'll get a town or a parish that goes through 2 or 3 clerks and then is absolutely fine, stabilizes itself. You know, do we have a role, and is there anything we can do to sort of reach out in those circumstances and offer, you know, anything? I don't know, mediation, even just somebody to talk to. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And apologies, Councillor Dimmery, for not picking up or not responding to that point that you made earlier. Yeah, absolutely, we can have a role. Absolutely, we can offer advice, guidance, and training in respect of those matters. At the moment, it's always been an aspiration since the creation of Somerset Council that we would do some more proactive outreach work to our town, city, and parish councils in terms of that code of conduct training to wrap it up into its widest description. That hasn't progressed because we were looking to do it hand in hand with both the Society for Local Council Clerks and the Somerset Association of Local Councils as well, to have a sort of tripartite training provider that would work together with them. Just for a number of reasons, that hasn't progressed as quickly as we'd want it to. What we're now looking to do is part of our wider engagement with city, town and parish councils, and linking it to the engagement that we're having with them over the devolution agenda as well, is to wrap that level of support up into a much wider enabling package. So yes, it's planned, but it hasn't been delivered as yet. But certainly we do have the ability to do it, and it's something that we do want to be proactive and progress on.
Thank you, David. Is that answer your question, Robin?
Yes, thank you. That's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I kind of figured that, you know, now we've gone to 2-tier rather than 3-tier, that, you know, I think there's an opportunity there. And as you know, as Dave said, you know, that there's possibly, you know, we could offer training or sort of collaborate with SALC or whoever, as he said, to sort of offer training or services. So I think there's, you know, there's a big opportunity for the council, you know, maybe even to earn some money, you know, offering services. Who knows?
And I think we've got Martin and then Paul.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm dragging this debate out a little bit, but there's lots of questions here when we're looking at the appendix. And we see charged town councillors coming, or town councillor coming up again and again in the early part of that documentation. And of course, it doesn't state whether it's the same councillor, and neither should it. But there are circumstances in which I'll ask the straightforward question: does the leader, or if it's a member of a political party, does the leader of the group get drawn into the discussion or ever get asked to intervene when a disciplinary issue comes to light?
They can do at Somerset Council level if it's deemed appropriate. At parish level, you often find that there's a much less political affiliation at city, town, and parish level. So not as formally organised into groups and group leaders at that level. And certainly there wouldn't be a role for the group leader at Somerset Council to intervene, and even if they were with the same political party, to intervene at a parish council level.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. But just to come back, I think there may be a case here for some political parties to step up to the plate, and where they do have recurring complaints about one particular councillor, then they should actually take some action, direct action, and ask that councillor to stand down or suspend them for a period of time. And I think it's very remiss if that happens and it's not dealt with by the local party. And I realise it's not something we can involve ourselves in, but it seems to be a lack of responsibility.
Okay, I've got thoughts on that. I'll come back to when Paul's raised a point. Paul?
Scott will want to put his hands over his eyes when I say this, because it's something that I was the chair of a parish meeting. Now, once again, there's been no discussion about parish meetings and how they are involved. Are they included? How are they discussed and brought into this in any shape or form? And I think it is remiss that they are not, because there's 30 odd parish meetings in Somerset, majority of which are not members of SULC. They are standalone. And I still do think, and I keep banging that I'm not involved and I'm not chairman or involved with the parish meeting anymore. But I do think they are left on a limb on their own, and there is no control and no coordination with the county in which they are in, apart from getting the precept if they're lucky to get one. And I do think that is very remiss. If we're trying to look at the structure and making sure that everything, for want of a better term, is squeaky clean, I do think it is the responsibility of the council, Somerset Council in this port, to look after them and make sure that they are abiding by everything. Because currently they're wafting in the wind.
Thank you, Paul. Is everybody aware of the difference between parish meetings and parish councils? Okay, perhaps I'd ask David to, I can have a stab at that, but I'll ask David to clarify that probably with a bit more knowledge.
Parish meetings are a forum. They're unelected, but they are a forum that's available to smaller areas where they don't have the threshold of potential constituents or inhabitants within the area, where they're not big enough to have a parish council. So unparished areas can have their own level of governance through a parish meeting, but they are unelected, and as unelected, they're not bound by the code of conduct, or there are no obligations to adopt a code of conduct, should I say. So our involvement in terms of standards complaints or code of conduct compliance, doesn't exist. We will try to provide them with support and assistance in terms of governance matters, but that's largely discretionary because it's not part of our remit. They are their own sovereign body, as are city, town and parish councils, and they have their own rules and guidance, and we have no oversight in those matters.
So are we saying that there are 30 areas that are non-parished in Somerset? That's effectively out with parish council.
37 when I gave up 18 months ago. 37 parishes. So they are not related or covered by a parish council.
But just from my perspective, I think it's quite difficult to have an input to something that doesn't have a code of conduct to work to, which is, I guess, the situation with parish meetings. If one takes a step back from that, we'll find it very difficult to get parish councils to adopt one code of conduct, reference previous correspondence, which go through again. So I think it'd be quite difficult to do that with parish meetings. And I think the reason they're there is perfectly acceptable and good in that they have a way of talking together as a group, too small, but of having their sort of joint views taken together. But of course, without a code of conduct, it's quite difficult to say, well, you've broken that one or this one, and there's nobody elected.
They get consulted on planning issues, they get a precept, they get all types of things like that they're involved with. But
the parish councils in all but name in those areas. Can anybody add anything to that? I'll move on to Brian, that adds to the discussion value. Thank you.
They are different. They're not parish councils in all but name because they have different levels of power and the ability to take actions and to control matters around allotments and parks and such like. Well, we as the principal authority can confer those powers onto a parish meeting. So we can confer the powers of a parish council onto a parish meeting. That has to come at their application or their request. So they do have the ability to precept as well, but again, for certain limited functions, and that precept is capped as well, whereas there's no cap on a parish council precept. So they are different, and just didn't want the parish councils in all but name just to pass.
Thank you, David.
Make those
Apologies, thank you
corrections.
for clarifying that. Brian, I think you had a.
I just wanted to refer back to Martin's question to David earlier on about group leaders being involved in this, and your response was not so many levels of council are politicised. In fact, I think more than you think are, and there needs to be a bit of consistency about it. Certainly the bigger towns have got definitely political control. You go on their website, you find their party affiliation, so they'll have a group leader. So is there, rather than what you said earlier, which was sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, or we just ask at county level the leaders, is there not an obligation for you to approach where organised the leaders of groups at local level too?
We wouldn't generally, because what we're assessing is any breach of the council's code of conduct rather than the party's code of conduct. So that's where the assessment is made. That's why the recommendations go back to the council as a whole rather than any individual political party. But I do accept and take your point that certainly in our larger towns there is that political separation and division and representation amongst that level.
Okay, I think we've covered all the questions that people have raised. I'll just make a few points myself, if I may. I think looking at the document that David's produced, I think it reflect back on one of the actions from the last meeting, which was to put in the ones that were reconciled. And I think some of the discussions we've had about is going to cover that in whatever you move forward within your own notes that you just made a few moments ago. I think it was the questions that Francis raised there. I think it would be I'd really like to see us moving forward to a more proactive basis, whether it's standards committee in supporting people that are out there, because there's a lot of volunteers working and they need every support they can get. I looked at this document again that David produced, and I think there's some interesting points in there. There's councils that come up again and again, and I don't need any further analysis of it, but it's quite, and one can do this yourself, is to look through there and see the regular people that are appearing. And I don't think it's the fact that in cases that I'm aware of, certainly, that it is about a number of different complaints being made in the same council. It's the same people that are often appearing again and again. But maybe that would flag up, if we are going to be proactive, an area that we might want to go out and talk to those councils that are appearing here pretty regularly and see if there's any advice we could give, and start with that as a sort of that's something positive that would come out of this analysis. So I'm not and never have been a fan of producing data unless it's actually used. And I think that's one of the questions I'd like us to reflect on. We'll see where we take that, but at the next meeting, when the final quarter comes through, and reflect on all these points, including the ones that David raised earlier on, things about deadlines and all that sort of areas that we've talked about. The coming back to the numbers that we started with, I was, for one, was concerned. I think we all were that there may have been a bit of a log jam back in districts that were just, with all the things that have been going on, they were going to flood through. And maybe that is one of the reasons why we've got this peak in May. Why it should be May rather than April, I don't know. But that was a concern that Francis raised earlier on about, could we handle all the data? And if it had gone at that level, I suspect that would be a real question we'd have been asking before now. But the complaint numbers, and I'm just going to ask David that at this point, the complaint numbers as they're tricking on now, which is really, if you go back to July with 10, and then the rest are going to be 2 6s and 3s. Is that something that you feel you're adequately resourced to handle?
Yes, Chair, it is, and it more closely reflects what we predicted as a group of monitoring officers in advance of vesting day, what we anticipated our complaint numbers to come in at. So yeah, I think we're back in more into the sphere of where we thought we would be a year ago.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to propose that we take this forward to a working group when the final quarter comes out, which will be May. Is that right? Am I working on the same timescale as here? Should be. So the data will be finishing in April, and the final quarter will get in May.
The data will finish in March.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
Final.
Sorry, working on the
So,
tax year for a minute there.
yeah, so I think next meeting is in March.
27th, I think, from me.
Yeah. So we'll be largely there for the March report. There may just be, if the numbers stay the same, I had 2 or 3 complaints which haven't been resolved yet by the time the papers are published. So we'll have about half of March's data. So it's up to you, Chair, whether you want a final year, a whole year report to come in May, or you want with an update in March, or you want kind of 11.5-month update in March.
I think I'd go, being a fussy old traditionalist, to the 12-month, but and I think what I'd ask all, because you'll have that report, is for us to digest that and come back with a lot of the points that have been made here about how we might refine and add to or subtract, and also particularly look at what value is coming out of the work, because it always requires officers time to do this, and where you feel the value is, because I think that would be useful to feed back to officers that you do find it valuable, where it is valuable, but also where you might want to see it enhanced or even reduced, if that can save some time. David.
Can we also look at the trends? I mean, it's really interesting here that 1/3 of these complaints are about disrespect. And, you know, what issues there? I mean, Martin's point about political leaders taking acting on this, but, you know, this is an area, you know, disrespect is something that really gives a bad reputation all around. But it's about, you know, for me, one of the key reasons for doing this is to look at trends in behaviour and, you know, what we can do to counter that in terms of training and whatever else. I think that's something when we get to the end of the year, we can have a close look at, you know, the causes of the complaints and and what can be done as a standards committee to try and improve the behaviours.
Thank you, David. Yes, I would just find useful personally on the pie diagram on page 19 if the numbers were put in there as well. The one that covers disrespect through to inappropriate use of council resources. That's the only addition I thought at this moment in time. But I think that would be useful if that's possible. Okay, so we carry this forward to, if we're looking at the full 12 months, it'll be the meeting that occurs after the end of March. First meeting, which I guess will be June. But that's only a guess there. Okay, unless they want to add to the discussion, we'll move on from that. David.
Just so clear, Chair, what I would intend to do then is to focus the March report as a Q4 report, and then I'll do the May report as a 23-24 summary.
Yes, if you feel that's not going to be, you know, doubling up the workload. Okay, fine. That'd be fine. Okay. Okay, thank you, David. No other hands up outside the room. And thank you again for doing all that work. Okay, moving on to register, sorry, the code of register of gifts and hospitality. I'd like to say something at the start of this element because it will add hopefully to the background to the rejection that we had from, actually, no, I'll keep my powder dry until we've had the report, which I think Scott's going to do.
Thank you,
Sorry
Chair.
about
And again, certainly in terms of background and context, I think the committee knows full well the context, certainly in terms of its debates and considerations at its meeting in August, its meeting in October, and then also in terms of the feedback from the council meeting that was on the 20th of December. I'll probably just direct the committee to paragraph 3.9 on page 27, which just provides a sort of high level summary of the key points that were raised from that council meeting. Again, you can see those at the bottom of page 27. And then more pertinently, I think just draw members towards paragraphs 3.10 and 3.11. I mean, 3.10 clearly in terms of highlighting options that are available, but 3.11 in particular highlighting that, again, the committee would be fully aware that the existing requirements for gifts and hospitality based on the Local Government Association's Model Code of Conduct. I know we've touched on that many times, even again today. But again, I think it's important perhaps also just to recognise in terms of that option 2, I think reflecting that as a council, we are still a relatively new council, and therefore in terms of 3.10.2, certainly in terms of further work to help embed, promote, improve awareness, but also where there could be some procedural points. There was some very good work by the priority group, particularly in terms of the declaration form. And for me, those are areas which, again, still could be taken forward with the committee's support because they fall under the remit of the monitoring officer. But I do think there is a point as well around recognising that the council is still relatively new, and certainly in terms of embedding the code, more could be done in terms of promoting the existing requirements, just to ensure members are fully aware, again, of the existing requirements.
Thank you, Scott. I'd just like to give you a bit of background to how we arrived. I think it's key. I'd like to pick up 2 elements from today. One is the learning points that might come out of the process. And secondly is any comments on the actual recommendations that we made and how we might want to take those forward. But perhaps some of the chronology would be useful for me to bring you up to date on. This first came to my attention when it was referred by the Constitution and Governance Committee. And I have to say, hands up, I've broken some of the main basic tenets that I've grown up having beaten into me over the years, which is not to waste anybody's time if there's nobody prepared to put forward a proper brief and to find substantial support for it. And I'll explain what I mean about that. So I asked the Constitution and Governance to go away and come forward with why they thought this was needed to be looked at, and to come back with a brief. And there was a delay, therefore, of a few meetings while nothing ensued. And I eventually got to the point where, after a number of emails and telephone calls and chasing, nothing still came out. And then we got to a pre-meeting discussion where, in fact, I said if there's nothing arrives by the time of the pre-meeting discussion, then it won't be on the agenda. And I went on holiday and found that it did come on the agenda through public questions. So again, we had an issue here that's been raised not by a volume or a body of the council or members or whatever it was, but and I think the 2 points I'll pick out of that is it needs to be a considerable number of people have got this as a concern, and secondly, a proper brief is brought forward so people like yourselves and me can make an informed decision. It's the sort of things we would always ask officers to do, and I think rightly so, and they do, and we make therefore hopefully an informed decision. However, it came through in public question, and I took a view on the day, and that was wrong. And I accept that because it was public questions, I didn't want to sort of make a point of cutting somebody, the ground away from somebody else at that point who was raising an issue, and leave it to be discussed. But it broke the two tenets I've already said of things that I've grown up with, which is that, you know, if somebody's got an interest in a particular point, how many other people are interested? And I asked those questions at the time. And secondly, can we have a brief on it? And we didn't get either of those. And I think if we had known, we would have probably taken the water better for the full council than the response that we got. I will add another thing in there. So I just wanted to give you a bit of back stuff that was going on, which you weren't and wouldn't be, and I didn't intend you to be aware of, but it's important you know that. And I was involved with this when it first appeared in, I think, about 2012, 2013, with local government reform, whenever that was. And at the time, it was a can of worms is right royally opened, and it was discussed at full council on many occasions, round and round, was left basically. And at that point, it was £5. And a lot of concerns about that was a cup of tea, and should you stop and have, if a resident asks you around with a particular concern, should you accept a cup of tea? And I went for several years not accepting any tea, people or anything else like that, just so I could be quite clear. It obviously had, so from my point of view, my learning process then was that, in fact, you know, if it's too low, then it does create that situation where you can look a bit discourteous, to say the least. So I wanted just to fill you in that background, and I think so. There's the two areas I'd like us to focus on now. Really, is one, the volume of the amount that is now we've been asked to reflect on. Secondly, the forms, and take the two bits separately, where we talked about them being accepted or not accepted, and reasons for that. Take those two things separately. That's my proposal, and I just throw that into the room for discussion, really. And I try to reflect the emails that have been sent at various times in putting those comments forward, but they are personal comments as well. So any comments? Alan.
Thank you, Chairman. I think everybody would expect me to speak on this one. Firstly, Chairman, I have written to David separately because when I watched the council video of that meeting, the chairman of council was introducing people by their first name, and a lot of them I did not know and had to, and the camera was not on them. So I have asked, please, if you are going to introduce members, please use their full names rather than their first names, because anybody watching this after the meeting will not know. I certainly didn't know some of them. In fact, David Fothergill, yes, I knew, but the camera wasn't on him, and I only saw the side of his head and tweaked that that's who it was speaking. I'm quite happy to go along with £50. I don't have a problem with that. What I am concerned about is something Councillor Hazel Priory-Sankey said about there's no trust left in public servants. How very true. As a body, Chairman, you probably have great trust in the post office in your local village. Do you have trust in the post office as an organisation? Probably not at this stage. We all have trust in the officers sitting around here. I'll use the old-fashioned phrase of the man on the Clapham omnibus. Does he have or she have trust in the council? Doubtful. So yes, trust has gone. And the only way we can level that out is by making sure that members, elected and co-opted, do their declarations properly. There are several other, I did watch that video and was highly amused that the person that raises the public questions did not speak. I suspect her leader told her not to. I don't know, but that's my suspicion, having worked in the system. All right, everybody's giggling, because yes, it does happen. I know it happens. So I think I'll leave it there, Chairman.
No, far away, to your head. David.
So similarly, I'm not precious about where the level is particularly. But again, it comes back to inconsistencies. And I made this point before, but on the disclosure of members' interests for parish councils, it does say that you have to reveal the name of any person from whom you have received a gift or hospitality with an estimated value of at least £25, which you have received in your capacity as a member of the council. So there's again inconsistency here between officers, parish councils and councils. And if we're looking for consistency, I think that's something that we need to address. And I think actually I watched the video today as well. And I think some of the points that were made were well made. I think what we didn't do was an impact sort of statement. And that's something that perhaps a learning point for us as well. I don't see though that in terms of the amounts, I think £25 is quite a reasonable amount actually. You know, you can have your cup of tea, you can have most buffets that you would attend, well, to events you would attend wouldn't exceed £25. So, and I think the points made, actually, the point that was made by Hazel Forrest, were that she would have to drive into Dean House or County Hall to submit a form. Surely that's online. It's a point that Alan made in his email. That, so, I mean, some of the points that were made in the full council meeting were relevant. I think some showed a lack of understanding of the process. But I think probably if we're looking for, and again, it comes down to reputation. And Alan sent round an article from, I think, the West Somerset Gazette. Well, it wasn't an article, it was a letter. It was a letter into the council, and that sort of reflects perhaps the view that Alan was talking about reputation. And I think Martin, did you respond to that? You know, I don't know whether it's the job of this committee to be responding to that, or one of us, even probably not a councillor. You know, I don't think a councillor should be reacting to those. But those comments were made there that at a time when services are being restricted, that councillors should be looking at their remuneration and the what is it, 2 million that was put aside for expenses. I think we should rebut that completely. I think, you know, Martin's point that, you know, you effectively, if you look at your remuneration in terms of you're working for less than minimum wage, you know, this is not, people need to understand that councillors are doing a lot of putting a lot of voluntary hours in here. And that, you know, you can't expect somebody to be picking up their own expenses. I mean, it's just, you know, but so I think those, you know, those views that can be published need to be rebutted. But, you know, I don't know how you do that. I don't know that I could do that personally or whether it's wrong for me to do that as a co-opted member of this committee. But I think, you know, comments like that need to be addressed somehow. I don't know what the best way of doing that is.
Okay, thank you, David. Anybody got any comments about David's views about the I think Martin's £8 an hour or whatever it was?
I thought Francis was going to speak earlier, but well, you're not. No, well,
We'll deal with David's. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up there. Yeah, okay. Any comments for David? It isn't part of this committee, as far as I'm aware, to look at the allowances and
I'll
sizes.
just say that you know, I responded in writing, and I hope people have read it. And I won't elaborate upon that.
Scott.
Again, hopefully, just for clarification, when again, hopefully you'll be aware, certainly to the topic we're talking about here, which is gifts and hospitality, is very different to the members' allowances scheme. But the scheme of members' allowances, again, is subject to a wholly independent process. And I appreciate many of you already know this, but just for public record, of our independent remuneration panel. That reports annually to the full council meeting. So there are opportunities for public scrutiny, public challenge in terms of that. And it's next due to be making its report to the council meeting on the 20th of February. So again, there's a further opportunity for, say, the person of that letter to submit, make their representations as part of the council's consideration. But I would say that allowances scheme is very clear in terms of its purpose, and it's very transparent in terms of opportunities for local taxpayers to have their say.
Does that answer your question, David?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Responding to that person, to that article in the West Somerset Gazette, just to say, to give that answer, you know, they have every opportunity to do that. So we should.
Yes, I know we're quite sure in these situations where that should be a personal response from somebody like yourself. Obviously not somebody who's a councillor, because it could look to be a feather in your own nest. Even make the situation worse, basically. But yeah, I think as one who was when I was first a councillor, there was a huge opportunity loss in terms of my reward remuneration by the day or two I'd spent doing county council. That's not why you do it, but I'm sure everybody's clear of that. But that's a personal view. Brian.
Well, picking up on what David said, Scott's answer was the correct one. That there's an independent remuneration panel that sets these things. I don't know about anybody else in the room, but I've been on various councils for just about 34 years this year. And the first time I was on council, I didn't know you'd get paid. And I discovered that I was losing money by being on the council. I'd been doing a lorry driving job, which I couldn't do because I had to be in the town for an hour during the day. We'd be getting paid something like £13 attendance allowance and lose £40 driving down to Cornwall for the day. So I think the gains that council has achieved over the next 10 years, when it was recognised that they should have that remuneration appropriate to doing the job as Martin described in his response to yourself, Alan, during the email exchange. I think it's quite important to defend that, and the councils don't need to do that because it's there in the laws of the country, explanations that Scott's just given, for instance.
Is it something that the council would respond to from their comms unit to that article in the? That's where the response should come from. Surely the council's comms unit, having consultation with David and Scott, it should come from, if there's going to be a response, it should come centrally from the comms of Somerset Council, shouldn't it?
We are moving off the agenda item here, but addressing the point that was raised through the email. My only personal thought on that, and I'll pass that back to Scott, is if people are to be aware of the consultation process that's going on at the moment, then maybe that's an opportunity just to flag that up. But I'm not sure whether that would be in your remit. I'll hand that over to David and or Scott.
I could more or less guarantee that our comms unit would say, don't touch that with a barge pole in terms of the corporate response, because it would just involve them into a ever spiraling tit for tat response, and it's not something that as a corporate body we'd want to get engaged in. Otherwise, that's all they would be doing, is responding to every letter and every paper to every editor. There's nothing else proactive coming out of it.
Okay. Good. Have I? Francis, you can.
I think that you'd finished that particular point, and I wanted to return perhaps to the paper and the recommendation, and bearing in mind everything that Alan has said and everybody has said, and particularly what Scott has had to say about promoting the current requirements. The most important thing of all is that the current requirements, whatever they are, should be complied with. And therefore, I would like to propose 310 option 2
to acknowledge the referral back from full council and focus on further work that could be done through the monitoring officer to promote the current requirements and consider any further work that could be done to embed these, i.e. guidance and training. I really feel that's the most important thing that we could do. Otherwise, we'll dance on a head of a pin between naught and £50 from here to kingdom come. Is anybody else going to second that?
I'll second that. I just wanted to pick up a few points before we do move through to the proposal, and thank you for making that, by the way. That I opened the offer to full council to bring back any thoughts they had to the monitoring officer. I think you slid off my shoulders onto you. Eventually, I got one which I passed on to you, which I think may be the one that's in the report. And as far as I know, that's the only response there's been from anybody of the councillors. So, and I'm just clarifying, is that the only one we've had? Right, okay, so, but the second point I wanted to make really was the discussion, leaving aside some of the perhaps more comments that should have been more carefully thought through before they were made, choosing my words carefully. It did display from the comments that were made by some people that they needed a bit of training about how the process worked, because people don't drive into Taunton to fill out a piece of paper, for example. And so maybe there's an opportunity very early on to remind them of that. But I think that would come back under option 2 that Scott's put down, 310.2 rather, that Francis is proposing. So I would like to second that and bring it back for a future meeting. But is everybody happy to support that as a proposal? You?
I'm not supporting it. I'm totally against it. I got up and said at the meeting, you know, we shouldn't get anything. We're here to serve. End of story. And if people want to persist in giving you something, then you transfer them to a society like the air ambulance or whatever like that. Give the money to them. End of story. That's what I do. I won't entertain it.
I think that's, to answer your comment, I think that's the point that Francis is making, that we would probably pick up every integer between 0 and 50 in discussion and find somebody to support you in each one of those. And I think you're of the 0 end. So, but that isn't what Francis is proposing at the moment, which is to, I'll read it, acknowledge the referral back from full council and focus on further work that could be done through the monitoring officer to promote the current requirements and consider any further work that could be done to embed these, i.e. guidance and training. That's the one that I've seconded. David.
When I was watching the video earlier, there was a lot of discussion around the quantum. There wasn't, but my understanding was that the proposal that we put forward to council also included an amendment of the form to indicate whether the gift was accepted or not. Was that discussed, or was that overlooked at the time? Because it was referred back before they got to that discussion. And do we need to still maintain that? We still want those changes to the form.
That was the second part of my opening statement, really, was about the number.
All right.
And secondly, the process of accept or decline and reasons. I don't think we're foreclosed about going down that route with Francis's proposal, are we?
Any further work, and it says i.e. guidance and training, and that could include forms.
Could include
Amending forms to make them more, more appropriate if they.
Okay. You then, Martin.
Chair, if you recall, when I stood up, I didn't highlight why the issue was raised in the first place, because I was embarrassed to say what the money was. It was a certain offer from a situation that was in the locality, and members of a committee to take it up if they so wished. And it was quite a lot of money. So that's what kicked everything off, I think you'll find, because I was careful not to say it. You play it back, you're
Thank you, Hugh. Martin?
I just, so we had a long discussion on this before. If my memory serves me, we didn't actually get into the issue of buffets as far as I can recall on that. Maybe I went to sleep at that point, if you forgive me, but I mean, as the debate was going ahead at full council, I was beginning to think there's so much discretion that that is involved in this entire process, and it's really very, very difficult to legislate for. I'm inclined to support Francis's view. I do think that whatever figure we come up with, it's going to be rebuffed if it's under the 50 quid that we now accept. And if we are regarding attendance at a buffet, and I think in the paper you kind of distinguished between something which is essential to survive or something which is given as a gift because you're at the Chamber of Commerce meeting or something like that. That, you know, these are details that we could mull over for absolutely for years. And I suppose if we go with a higher ceiling, we don't get into that debate. We just have to go along with it. But I would say that the point I made at the meeting, that it's about public perception of what we're doing and being seen to be done, was rebuffed by one or two people. And I think that's unfortunate because we've seen from the letter that it is public perception is very important at the moment, at any time. While I think the majority of councillors are not looking to play the system at all, if we don't make it clear that it's not possible to play that, or we come down heavily on people that do try and play the system, then we will be forever held up as bad examples of public servants. So I would go along with that, and I'm afraid I don't think we can debate the issue of how much now. I think we just have to go with the £50 and let it lie personally.
Thank you, Martin. David?
Well, just a quick point that actually, if you're going to go with £50, can we stay at £50 for a while and let inflation erode it a bit?
Yes, I don't think anybody will be leaping into this discussion too soon again. So I think all those areas really are left in the statement which Scott introduced and has been proposed by Francis and seconded by me. The options are all open. I think if we are using the LGA as the basic skeleton to start with, I think we move away from that only with a great deal of thought and consideration, because it does give us a backstop in terms of something that's common. Otherwise, we have to support everything that's different from that. But that doesn't necessarily include the situation about the forms and accept, decline, and all those sort of things, which may add to the clarity, even though the number doesn't change. And I think that's something we need to give further thought to. So I would, unless anybody else has got a violent disagreement, Martin, I think is supporting. I just have a show of hands, including, I know the co-opted aren't involved, but including them, to support the Francis proposal, which is under 310.2. My second, show of hands. No, fine. Thank you. Thank you for sticking with your moral position. Now, in terms of timescale, I would suggest, do we want to bring this forward for further discussion at the next meeting, or let the dust settle a bit? My personal view is perhaps let the dust settle a bit and come back to the meeting that's not the next one, but the one after that. We'll just refer back, I would imagine, that we've adopted that particular 310.2. Is that right, Scott? But if somebody asks what's happened, that's what's happened. That's what will happen, sorry. Okay. Right, does that keep the bureaucracy, the admin, the legal side Everybody happy about that? Okay, thank you very much for that discussion and thank you for, now, you probably noticed I haven't been doing the action plans. I've gone along. I've got a bad back at the moment, so I don't want to leap up and down, so I'll do it at the end, if you don't mind. But let me see where we go next. Work programme and actions. Back. So if you don't mind if I do the actions subsequently, I'll try and pick up some of them that have gone along. In the matters arising. We've got several referred forward to the next meeting, which I'll mark up and at the end, which is on the 27th of March. That covers all those that are taken forward. We've picked up the code of conduct comments. I'll just check those through when I go through at the end of the meeting. Excuse me doing that again. Register of gifts and hospitality. We know where we're going with that with 3.10.2. So let's move on to the programme of work. I think the next thing we have to consider is a report from the committee. Is that right, Scott? Will that be for the next meeting?
It will, Chair. It's intended that we bring what's called the committee's annual report to your next meeting. That's to allow you obviously to review that prior to it then being reported to the council's annual general meeting in May.
So what would be the process? You would normally send that?
That formed part of the agenda for your next meeting in March. You then to consider.
Would we need to discuss, you and I need to discuss it before then?
Certainly, Chair, if you'd welcome that.
Yeah, please. Yes, thank you. The work programme, then it's got standing item, which is David's. We'll move forward to 27th. The model code of conduct. There's going to be a view back from P2 about that. Standing item is minutes and action plan. Standing item is work programme. Annual report we just talked about. Gifts and hospitality, we've just taken forward 2 meetings. Media plan review and costings. That was down for P1. I think, sorry, yeah, this is about, correct me if I'm wrong, this is about complaints and how we communicate them. There was a media protocol. I don't know whether it's actually being used, has it? There's only been one that's gone through to a subcommittee. And sorry, I'm just going to digress. At the subcommittee, we said that we would get some feedback as to how on the uptake of the recommendations from the subcommittee. But we had that from the council in question.
Yes, Chair, we have. Yeah, all the recommendations were adopted and implemented in terms of the training recommendations. Yeah.
David.
Chair, the media protocol obviously refers to complaints at various stages of the process, not just to hearings. So complaints that have been submitted and are subject to local resolutions. So it does apply beyond just the hearing process. So yeah, it is applied because sometimes we do get press inquiries saying, I understand a complaint's been submitted about such and such and such and such. Can you tell me what the outcome was? And then we'll apply the protocol in such a case. So if the committee want to revisit it and review it and receive a report on how it's being applied, then happy to do so. But it's not applied very often, but it is applied above and beyond the hearing process.
So P1 were to meet to have a discussion about a review, what would we base it on in terms of data?
I mean, largely be looking at the content of the protocol, to see if you were still in agreement with the way, with what was adopted. I think the costings element, was part of the wider cost, not just of hearings, but of assessments and investigations, and that's why within the complaint summary, we have that time applied to each complaint, and it would just be a case of applying an hourly rate to that time commitment in terms of establishing a cost. But in terms of the wider cost and the larger costs that are associated with hearings, then you're right, we've only had the one in the last 12 months.
Thank you, David. So what I would suggest is, so I'm involved with P1, is that the members, we have a discussion before we leave about our diaries. And P1 is Brian, Francis, David and Paul. And put a date in the diary to have a Teams discussion about how we take that forward, along with the item that's further down, number 11. For the 27th, so that's prior to the next meeting on the 27th of March. Would that be a suitable way forward? Okay, nobody demurred from that. Keep under review effectiveness, operational effectiveness of the Standards Committee and Standards Hearing Subcommittee arrangements, and to recommend any changes considering necessary to the council. That was something, Francis, that we discussed right earlier on today, and if I could just ask you to get together with P2, come back with some comments, review, plan, recommendations for the next meeting on the 27th of March. Would that be reasonable? Okay. Okay, so that covers the programme of work and actions. Nothing else on the agenda, so thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And we'll meet again on the 27th of March. So have a safe journey home.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.